Welcome to episode 0034 of Gary's Glorious Golden Nuggets. And today we have George Kapernaros, who is coming into us from Athens, Greece today. This is one of the things I just love about being in the digital world. It doesn't matter where you are on earth, we are connected through the internet, and we can just have these kind of conversations. So let me tell you just a little bit about George. He's such an interesting character. George is the owner of GeorgeKapernaros.com, and this is an e-commerce company that he has developed that helps people develop their brand for the long game and to win through retention and behavioral marketing. So previous to this, he was the marketing director at divbrands.io. He has been involved in over 200 e-commerce product launches to date and has a deep understanding of marketing, copywriting, shopping behavior, and digital advertising. He is a Facebook Blueprint certified creative strategist, a CXL certified conversion rate optimizer, and a Klaviyo partner. So I want to welcome you, George, to my humble show, Gary's Glorious Golden Nuggets.
Gary, thanks so much for having me. And this is probably one of the best intros I've ever had. Thank you so much for the kind words.
Oh, you're very kind. You know, George, I find it really interesting to have somebody with such depth and breadth in the digital world as an e-commerce individual. So what do you wish you had known before you walked into the digital world?
I actually have two things I wish I'd known for different reasons. The first and probably biggest one is the power of networking, actively networking, because it's easy to forget that online. So much of business is relationships. Online, offline, it doesn't really matter. The more and better people you're connected to, the more opportunities you have. And Gary, what may seem like a big problem to me or to you may be business as usual to somebody that's more experienced than us, right? So it's incredible to have a network of people that can help you. What may be similarly the equivalent of 30 minutes of your time may be very impactful for somebody that's a little bit behind you in terms of business. And that may pay off nicely and hugely over the long term. Obviously, what I'm talking about is transactional, but the way to go about networking is to not treat it as transactions. So long as you're willing to give freely and praise often and criticize never, you can get good at networking. And this is something that took me a long time to realize. I'm not what you would call a natural networker. But since I have started doing that a little bit more intentionally, I've seen it pay off immensely. The second thing that maybe it's even more important, I'm not sure, is that it's better to move than it is to analyze. A good way to think about it is this: it's best to be directionally correct and fast moving than it is to try and be precisely accurate and be slow. So much of life is guesswork. And so much of life is randomness, really. So when it comes to business, that's even more true. And what we tend to want is perfectly charted path, perfectly mapped out journey, but that's not really feasible, and it's not really what we need. What we need is a sense of where we're going and the pair of legs that won't stop moving, And yes, that might get us into trouble, but we will get into trouble anyway, even if we try to find and calculate every little turn of the way. So I'm not advocating against having a strategy, obviously. What I'm advocating against is spending our time pondering whether this idea or that idea are any good, when it's so much easier these days to just test it, and course correct as needed, if needed.
I think anybody who is listening to this podcast has already picked up a couple bucket loads of golden nuggets just off of that answer. Because you're absolutely right. Networking is one of the things I was absolutely ill-prepared to engage in when I came into this sphere. And one of the things that I discovered is you can go out and meet with people and still not network, because networking is work. And it's getting to know people and creating those relationships. And you're absolutely correct. if you're going to make it in this market, you have to take massive action, and it's better to move in the right direction with maybe the wrong message or an incorrect message. That's something you can adjust fire along the way until finally your message is absolutely right and the market knows who you are. So I really appreciate that's really good information. That's solid information. George, you've been doing this for a while. You've had some things that didn't work out the way you wanted them to. What was the biggest one that didn't work the way you wanted it to work out? And what did you learn from it?
So I've actually had a lot of failures when it comes to e-commerce. Lots of, out of those 200 launches you mentioned, a lot of them failed, is what I should say. But if I were to boil it down to one thing, my biggest professional failure is more of a management. And I don't want to get too specific because it's not polite to do so, but I will explain the situation in broad strokes. So I started managing people, and a fairly big team too, I should say, very early on in my career, probably earlier than I should have, if you are honest. And the big mistake I did, which is, it will be obvious to somebody that has managed people before, is that I did not adjust the way I communicated based on who I had in front of me. I had a way of managing people that was tailored to me, and that's just how I did things, And here's what happened, Gary. I'm a bit of a high performer. I like to push myself, but not everyone is a high performer, right? So when you try to motivate somebody who's not, as if they are a high performer, all you'll do is stress them out and make them not want or not be able to perform. And that's exactly the mistake I did when I first started managing. I was push, push, push. And some people will handle it well and they will grow to be tough and productive and efficient, but others will inevitably run out of gas and they won't be able to keep up, which will unfortunately have the opposite effect. Instead of performing well, they will start underperforming. So the big takeaway, if any, for our listeners is this: know who you're talking to and have the empathy to really try and see things from their own eyes. Just because you or me are made a certain way doesn't mean that everybody else is. And a little hack of sorts I like to use these days is this: when I do start a longer term partnership with a contractor, I actually pay for them to do a personality test. And ask them to share the results with me. And this is incredibly useful to know how to collaborate with some.
That's very interesting. Now, before we even began this podcast, we had a little bit of a brief interview. And one of the things that I have garnered from everything that you have is that you're basically really into the behavioral mechanics of people, why they shop, what they're thinking about when they see an ad, etc. So what I'm really kind of interested in is the average person who comes into the e-commerce universe who wants to sell something, whether they're an affiliate marketer or they're an e-commerce or they just have a course or something that they have developed themselves. People struggle with creating an accurate avatar who would be the perfect buyer. They think that everybody is just them. And how do you help people with that?
I don't have such a sexy answer to that question, unfortunately. The best way to do that is to talk to the people who shop from you or to the people who you would like to shop from you. So if you're developing a course and you don't really have a product, then you should talk to people who are going to be a little bit like your target market. Now, as for how you want to talk to them and what do you want to ask of them, that's a little bit trickier. What you want to know essentially is what is the problem they are trying to solve. And then based on that, you can give them a reason why your product or your solution is better or different than whatever else is available out there.
Thank you very much for that very succinct answer. It may not have been sexy, but it was absolutely the truth. And so many people who come into the digital universe miss that for a long time. And they're struggling and they're wondering why their ads aren't working, or they're wondering why the product is not flying off the digital shelf, so to speak. And I think that you just handed people a truckload of gold. Apply that correctly, and your chances of success have exponentially increased. So thank you, George. I really appreciate that answer. Now, what resources do you use for yourself? For example, you just told us that when you enter into a new long-term relationship with a partner, you actually pay for a psychological test. You're the first person to ever say that, but that makes sense after, I spent 37 years in psychology. I got a PhD in psychology, and I tested people all the time. But I never thought about doing that in the digital world when I'm marketing folks. So that to me, I thought, man, that's brilliant. So the resources do you go to or rely on to help you achieve your goals?
So my goals, I don't have a specific resource that helps me achieve my goals. I think it's more of a system. What I do is the following. I have a file which used to be on Google Sheets, but now it's housed on Note, which is an amazing tool that I call the Life Planner. What I do on the Life Planner is I have a weekly task list, which is literally a checklist. I have my to-dos there. In addition to that, I have some KPIs, key performance indicators, which I try to hit weekly. For instance, how many sales conversations do I want to have this week? 5. And then every Sunday, when I sit down, I actually evaluate how I did. Maybe I only had 3. Why? If I'm off my metrics, I try to course correct. Now, in addition to that layer, the KPI layer, I also have bigger goals. When you only go by week, it's easy to lose the bigger picture and focus on the weeds, But when you plan ahead quarterly, which is what I do, it's much easier to work towards bigger goals. And again, everything moves so fast that it is almost impossible to precisely predict what will happen and what you should do and how you should do it. But even if you have an overarching goal for the quarter, even just having that will push you towards the right direction, or at least closer to the right direction, So I also do that. I try to set quarterly goals. My current company is fairly new, so my current goals are based around sales, establishing a proper lead generation system, a qualification process for new clients, and then obviously packaging the service delivery in a way that makes sense for me and the contractors I use. And I mean, on an even higher and more abstract level, you can also go about setting 1-year goals, 3-year goals, 5-year goals, and so forth. I found that for me personally, my annual goal tends to change over time, so it's not super helpful. But as I said, it helps to have a sense of direction. And even if it changes, that's not an issue. You will at least, generally speaking, move towards the right direction by doing so. If I may give a little bit more color to my answer, though, because you asked about resources. When it comes to actual, down and dirty marketing know-how, the resource I like to use and would recommend in a heartbeat is cxl.com, which is an excellent learning institute. I'm certified by them. You mentioned it earlier. They have, I think, some of the best digital marketing courses online, and they're fairly affordable too, I should add, for our listeners. And one other thing I tend to spend a lot of time on is the corporate blogs of the big tech companies. Now I'm talking about Facebook, Google, Twitter, Pinterest, etc. All of these companies publish some research, which is quite insightful often. And you can find them online by searching something like Facebook blog. Facebook's blog is called Facebook IQ specifically, or Google's is Think with Google. But if somebody searches for that online, they will come across some very, very interesting and insightful research.
I think you just handed a mine full of gold in that answer, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, because goal setting and holding yourself accountable is extremely important. And I like how you have it outlined for yourself, but also the end answer where you add a lot of flair to that. That was amazing, because I didn't even know about those 2 resources. So thank you for sharing.
A pleasure.
So let me ask you this: authors, books, people, can you name a few that have really influenced you in your existence within this digital world, that have really assisted you and been a good resource to you?
I sure can. So I'll first start with an author. His name is Blair Warren, and he's the author of a book called, it's a little bit of a tacky name. It's called The book is called The Forbidden Keys to Persuasion. So it's a little bit tacky, but it is an amazing and incredibly insightful read. What this guy did was that he studied cult and how they persuade people to join them and retain them over time. And what he did is that he simplified the entire process of persuasion. And I think it's directly applicable to things like advertising, things like marketing, things like personal branding. It's an incredibly rich book, which I would wholeheartedly recommend. When it comes to bigger celebrity, let's say, influences of mine, I would say that another big one would be Jay Abraham. He's a marketing guru that's a little bit out of fashion these days because he used to do marketing before we were born, probably. So that's the reason why he's out of fashion. But he has some very interesting ideas. One of his ideas that I really took to heart is that of client service. He calls it the strategy of preeminence. And what he means by that is that our job as service providers is not to provide services, it is to be advocates in favor of our clients and to do all we can to make them succeed and to even push them towards a different direction if that's right for them. And what this does is that it builds a lot of good in the market. You have people that work liking you and wanting to work with you. And secondly, it actually makes you feel nice inside because you, instead of hunting for clients, now you're doing good. And for me personally, that has been a big shift in how I think. To get a little bit more down to earth, my bosses were big influences, definitely. Jonathan Esliman and Lorenzo Maciel from Div Brands are both geniuses, and I learned a ton from them. I feel incredibly lucky to have worked with them. Yeah, I think that's it for my influences.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So tell me more about your brand, what services you're offering.
So the main service we currently offer is retention marketing for e-commerce companies that want to play the longer game. And what I mean by the longer game is a game that's not reliant on Facebook, that's not reliant on Google, that's not running behind account bans and issues and all those things, which is what unfortunately most e-commerce companies are dealing with on the regular. Let me zoom out a little bit so that I give a little bit of context to what I'm saying. The very unfortunate reality of most e-commerce companies is that they are not terribly profitable. If you look at the big and popular brands, the direct-to-consumer poster boys, for instance, Outdoor Voices, for instance, Brandless, all those companies funded themselves because they received investment by venture capitalists. Unfortunately, that's not something all of us can do. So what happens is that you have a company that's spending a ton of money in advertising, but takes home very little profit. Now, this is where I come in. What we do is that we identify the standard behavior of the customers they have, and we set up systems, automated systems. The service is delivered through Klaviyo, who is a partner of ours. Klaviyo, for context, is an email and SMS marketing platform. So the service is delivered to Klaviyo, and the aim is to get repeat sales and foster and nurture customer loyalty to the brand. It is done on a monthly retainer basis. There's no long-term commitment. And what any e-commerce owner is listening to us right now, what they should expect is that by the time we're done, they should have around 30% of their total revenue coming through email. That's fairly reasonable to expect for most not all product categories, but for most product categories. And if it's not a good fit, we would tell them from the get-go.
Thank you very much. You're very interesting. I know there's people who are like, how do I contact this guy? So number one, I'm going to tell everybody, I'm going to put your contact details in the show notes, but tell us verbally, how do people contact you?
I'm very easy to contact. Just search for my name on LinkedIn. My name that's Kapernaros. just search for my name on LinkedIn, connect with me and shoot me a message. And if there's something cool we can do together, I'm more than happy to discuss it.
Awesome. All right, George. I always end the show by giving the guests 2 uninterrupted minutes to talk about anything they want to talk about, whatever's on their heart. And so your 2 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much. I've thought long and hard about what I would say here. My message is about being relentless. Whoever you are who's now listening, whatever your goals may be, I want you to know this. The time to act and get shit done is now, not later. It will never be any less challenging or stressful or downright frustrating than it is today. So act, get moving and move fast, and allow yourself to have some passion and some urgency and some love for your goals and for your dreams. Because the time is now. We are at the Olympic Games. And even though so many people like to be negative, and it's been a rough couple of years to be sure, and perhaps you even be forced to deal with hardship, the likes of which a stranger like me can't even begin to imagine, it's still undeniable that this is the best time to be alive. And let's not forget that. Remember that every challenge is an opportunity to learn, and remember that every success is an opportunity to start again at a higher level. So do and be relentless. That's it.
Thank you, George. That's amazing. George Kapernaros, ladies and gentlemen, contact details will be in the show notes if you're interested in further conversations with him. We have had so many golden nuggets thrown out in this show. I hope you find them all. If you've enjoyed this show, please subscribe. If you haven't, share it with somebody that you know that may benefit from the information that George has provided us today. And we will see you on the next podcast. Thank you, George.
Thank you so much for having me, Gary.